Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all. My name's Harleen, and I'll be your host for today's session. I hope you're all having a great day so far and are now excited and ready for the brand new informative session of the Masterclass series organized by the Institute of Product Leadership. Without further ado, I'd like to kickstart this session by welcoming and introducing a speaker, Kaustubh Khandelwal. Kaustubh is a senior product manager with over 8 years of experience in high growth tech environments, leading product strategy, driving user acquisition, and delivering innovative software solutions. With expertise in A B testing, data analysis, and process automation, he has launched consumer and internal products as an early employee, founder, and consultant. We're so pleased to have you join us today, Kaustubh.
Awesome. Thank you, Harleen. Thank you for such a nice introduction.
Of
Hi,
course.
everyone. First of all, thank you so much for joining in on a Saturday morning. I'm sure you all had a big week and still sort of taking time to sort of learn more. That's amazing. All right, should we dive in?
Yeah.
Awesome. So today's session primarily is about how do we drive growth in products through experimentation, specifically in the domain of consumer mobile apps. Okay. Uh, we'll dive into couple of things through the session. We'll do a brief about what is product-led to growth, what is the role of experimentation, some examples of experiments that I have done in the past, what are the effective ways of running experiments, how do you build actionable hypotheses, what should you keep in mind to maximize your experiment success, some success and failure stories of other companies and what I have done so far, and some best practices to sort of keep in mind while running experiments. Towards the end, I've also curated some templates and some resources for you all that you can use to run experiments. Okay. All right, awesome. And throughout the session, if you have any questions, please do post them in the chat. We'll keep them sort of, coming in as and when a relevant slide pops in. Okay. All right. Now moving to the first part. What is product-led growth? Right. Product-led growth essentially is building products in different, in trying to push different metrics, typically in a rightward and upward direction, right? Within that, you can do sort of break down the product metrics along the lines of user acquisition, activation, conversion, and retention, right? Within that, what we can sort of some examples of what we can do at each of these steps is during user acquisition. If you want to increase user acquisition, you can use direct referrals, where users are actually sharing the link of your app to other users. Hey, you should check it out, right? Second way could be you could get users to generate some shareable content within the product. And when they go and share that on Instagram or other platforms, other users are going to discover that, and then they'll come and sort of, download your app and start checking it out. And third is blanket like paid ads. And there are a bunch of product work that is needed to even make them successful. So there you could be working on any of these three major verticals to increase user acquisition. Okay. Next, moving on to activation. In activation, also either you can activation. First of all, is everybody familiar with these terminologies? User activation, acquisition, activation, conversion, retention, or do we need to go deeper into that? You can just confirm it in the chat. Anyone? Yes. Okay. We're good. Okay. All right. Now, for activation, you can either optimize your onboarding process, how you are getting user into your product, right? Or you can focus on faster value discovery. So let's say you are creating a beautification app, which is you upload an image, you somehow edit it, and it makes your image more beautiful, right? So your primary objective in such product should be, how do I get user to upload an image and get back to them with a beautified image really fast, in least number of clicks, in least number of effort, right? Just so that they can understand what is the value that we are delivering with the product. And if this value is good enough, then they'll stick around, then they'll make all the payments, then they'll come back and all of that. But if it takes too much time for users to actually discover that value, then you've lost the battle, right? So that is another way of sort of doing activations. Next is conversions. Again, how do you get, so this is also, conversions are primarily sort of more focused towards subscription products. So for example, let's say a Netflix, or we run a product called Crafto. Canva is a subscription product. So a bunch of, like, any of these subscription products, that is where like payment conversion particularly sort of plays in, right? A product which is, let's say, a social media app, their conversion or payment conversion particularly does not play as much role, because the platform is making money via showing you ads, right? Yeah. So coming to conversion, there are three major sort of models that people follow, or rather two models. One is you give people free trial, and then once they discover the value of the product, try the product for a while, post that time period, they get to choose whether they want to sort of continue using the product by making a payment, or they can drop off at that point. Second is a freemium model, where there's some level of value that you show to all users, irrespective of whether they've made payments or not. And there's more value locked behind like a paid mode. So something like a Spotify is a great example of that. Right now, a bunch of OTT platforms that we see, Geo Cinema, Sony Live, all of those, they have some shows that you can watch even if you are not a paid subscriber. And then for some content, you have to pay and sort of buy that subscription and access that content. Sorry. Now, within these, we can go deeper into actually doing payment screen optimizations, which would ensure more people who show interest in the product end up purchasing your product. Okay. And the last one is retention, which is fundamentally just increasing the value prop of your product. If your product is not delivering the value it is promising, or not delivering it effectively, you will never get retention. And there is a caveat here that if you if the value that you're delivering, you might be delivering effectively, but users are not looking for it, then that is also not going to work, right? But let's say users are looking for this value, and if you are not delivering it effectively, you won't be able to get retention. So I think that's like a broad spectrum under product led growth, right? Couple of things that we can do in each of these verticals, right? Any questions right now? Anything? All right.
I don't see any so far in the chat in Q&A. So if anyone
Okay.
does have any, you're welcome to post them. And then we
Okay.
have a question from Nitin. Can you explain retention again? Got confused with PMF.
Got it. Got it. So, Nidish, Nitin, right? Sorry. Okay. So, retention broadly is users keep on coming back to discover value of your product, right? Now they are going to come back to use, like, get that solution that you're providing, or use that solution that you're providing only when the solution is good enough, only when the value addition that that solution is doing is is exciting enough, is solving their problem good enough that they'll keep on sort of coming back, right? uh, when you say confused with PMF, right? So PMF, at least how I look at it, is there is minimum value that you are delivering which gets them interested, and there is some level of retention and ideally flatlining retention that happens there, right? Now if you keep on sort of increasing that value more and more, the number of users sticking around for a long period of time, that flat line of retention is going to keep on jumping up, right? So PMF is the first stage of having retention, and then you can keep on increasing that over time. But I think you are pointing out the right thing, that if you don't have PMF, that is like basic retention, then no matter you keep whatever you can keep on doing, it's never going to sort of you can keep on increasing, let's say day 1, day 7, day 30 retentions, but it was always churn out later. So yes, PMF is like a precursor to sort of start increasing your retention, but the first focus does need to be like flatlining the retention. uh, yes.
Nitin has responded with thank you. So
Okay.
adding value beyond reaching PMF is where the retention game is. Okay, we have a question from Harsha. How do ads fit into product led growth? Don't companies have to pay for ads, and doesn't this fall under the purview of the marketing team?
Fair. So companies do have to pay for ads, rightly. I think you're pointing it out rightly. But how do you build an experience of a user coming from a particular ad, right? That's where product work comes in. And yes, marketing team can come up with the best creative that is getting a user to install your product at the cheapest cost, right? But if can you do something once the install has happened to actually sort of get that user to convert more? So for example, let me sort of my screen is shared, right? Let me just give me a second. Okay, let me show you an example of a product that we are building. uh, okay, so this is one of the products that I'm working on. This is called Crafto. uh, we have about 2 million active paid subscribers, and the concept of the product is that you'll get content in different categories with your name and photo on it. That's the basic premise. There's a bunch of more things that you can do, right? Now think of it like this, that typically the ads for this product are going to be, hey, this is an interesting content, you can add your photo and name to it and share it with others. Share birthday wishes with others, give them motivation, share something around Bible with others, etc., right? Now if the marketing team is, let's say, running this creative, and through all their experimentation with different creatives, this creative is the one getting the cheapest install for you. User came in looking at that creative, was excited to install your app because of that creative, signed up through that, right? Went through all your whatever details, phone number, OTP, or Google login, all of those processes, and then lands on your home screen where the value discovery basically happens. Now, as a product team, you can ensure that this content that the user came in seeing, this is what they are going to see first, right? So this could be one of the ways that you can collaborate with with the marketing team to ensure that the ads that they are running, we are able to extract the most value from them. uh, does that make sense? All right. Awesome.
Uh, I don't think we have any more questions.
Okay, okay, okay. All right. Let's move to the next part. Why experimentation matters. So, yeah. So I think you are like, as PMs, our job is to essentially know what the users want, and sort of, be able to get there, hit the mark with the correct solution as soon as possible. If you are able to deliver that as a PM, you'll typically help the business grow multifolds, right? Now, to be able to do that, how do you come to a conclusion that this particular thing that we are doing, or this particular idea that we came up with, is the right solution, or is in fact even the right problem that people care about, and enough people care about that we can build a business, solving that problem for people? And that is where to get to that truth faster and with more accuracy is where experimentation comes in. Rather than us sort of, coming up with an idea, let's try it, roll it out to users, then 3 months down the line we discover, hey, the conversion has dropped, hey, the retention is going down, hey, enough people are not paying, enough people are not signing up on the product, what has happened, what did we change? And then we again go back trying to figure it out, these were the 10 changes that we did. And then you keep on sort of, backtracking and going through all that hassle. So to avoid that, and to sort of, make sure that you're heading in the right direction, you're building the right things, you're solving the right problems, and sort of, giving it to most, like the best possible solution to most number of users, is where experimentation basically comes in, right? And specifically in today's day and age, and when you're building large scale consumer products, it's very hard to hit the nail the first time that you come up with a solution. It's very, very hard. It's almost impossible unless like you're God gifted or something like that, which I think most of us are not, right? So you need to build processes within the company, within how you build product, to ensure that you go in the right direction. And that's where experimentation comes in. So what it results in essentially is that you are taking informed product decisions. There are two ideas that you have, you test them out, see what is working better, and then you go and sort of, roll out the better working idea to most number of users, which results in essentially enhanced user experiences, which in time is going to turn into your competitive advantage and essentially result in sustainable growth. Now let me go a bit deeper with an example in terms of how experimentation is connected with sustainable growth. Okay. So Instagram, about this is data from about 3 years ago. Instagram had 15 product pods. Each of these pods used to do 12 to 20 experiments every quarter. They did, they had about, 60 to 70% of these experiments would be good enough to ship to prod. So some of them would be really successful, some of them would be mildly successful, etc., etc. But net 60 to 70% of positive experiments used to happen, which essentially resulted into Instagram shipping 150 approximately positive changes in a quarter. 150 positive changes. Think of the compounding effect and the advantage that you get if you are able to build a process like that within your organization, within your pod, within your team, depending on, whatever, wherever you are in the PM ladder, right? If you are a director and you have a bunch of pods reporting into you, or maybe you are running a pod, or maybe you are a member of a pod, right? Any which way, if you are able to even add like couple 2 to 3 positive changes to prod every month over a year, over a quarter, and then over a year, you'll be able to make net massive progress, right? And that is where sort of experimentation comes in. That is what experimentation helps it to. It gives you the confidence that, hey, these particular things that we have rolled out to to all of our users, these are net adding this much value, right? uh, any questions, any doubts, anything? All right. Okay, now let's go to like some examples of the experiments that I've run, right? So as I talked about, like this is Crafto, a content app where you get content personalized to your profile, right? So typical flow for users is that they land on the home screen after they create a profile, they get a bunch of content in a content feed, right? And when they click on share or download, they get to a payment screen, right? So this is what we started with. We saw decent conversion, but not, obviously we would want to push, right? So we thought, okay, maybe you should show the value that they are seeking on the payment screen itself, or show the content that they want to share rather on the payment screen itself. So we came up with this sort of a UI. Now, to be able to sort of, clearly state that is it actually going to increase our conversion or not, we ran an A/B experiment, right? Which is going to tell us whether this particular UI is actually communicating what we want to communicate to the users, that, hey, this is the type of content that you'll get multiple content, right? You are not paying for just one content that you clicked on share for, right? Then over time, we thought that this first of all resulted into about a 12% increase in conversion, right? Then over time, what we saw in terms of our unit economics was that the cost of acquisition for a paid subscriber was more than $70 here, right? Not more than $70 actually. When you, especially if you are building like product for iOS, 30% goes to Apple, right? So but the economics of it weren't working out, so we thought, okay, maybe we want to build this product out, maybe we should charge a higher subscription fee, and then sort of test it out and see if the economics of it is going to work. Again, another experiment where just this change, right? Then we thought, okay, right now we are communicating that these are the type of content that you're going to get, but what if we try and communicate what are you going to get when you actually share this content? That you will get recognition on the social platforms, you'll get likes, comments, people are going to appreciate you. Maybe that is the end result, might sort of hit the nerve better for the users and get them to purchase or try it out at least, right? So this is where another experiment came in, and then another one, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to communicate with this are two things. One is that you can come up with multiple hypotheses, right? But you need to ensure that you only test one change ideally, right? So in this, the pricing has remained same. Only additional change, everything else, all these points are same, right? Only additional change is this. Here, if you look at only this UI change, right? Here, if you look at these points converted into one main headline, again, here we'll see just the headline is being experimented with. What if we could, what if we did this versus this, these two experiments in one go, Like this is the your control, and this is the next thing that we came up with. Now, even if there was a positive change that would happen, or a negative change that would happen, we won't be able to pinpoint what was the cause of it, right? And that is where, let's say, there's net negative on this. Let's say this increased by 10%, this decreased it by 12%, etc., etc. Net negative. You'll discard all the changes that you have done, and you won't be able to sort of, actually see, or rather, you'll miss out on some positive additions that you could have done in the product, right? So that is the primary sort of understanding that I wanted to share with these examples, that yes, you need to do experiments, but you need to be also be very careful of what you are experimenting. You need to be very clear that this is the specific change that I am doing. This is what I think is going to happen, right? And this is exactly how I'm going to measure it. Okay. uh, any questions?
I don't see any in. Wait, 1 second. We have Prasad who has asked, how do you choose audience for your experimentation? If we go ahead with free trials, then how do we ensure users stick to our platform after we decide the price point? I think, okay, that's two questions there then. The first one being, how do you choose the audience for the experimentation?
Okay. So I think there are two major things to think about in that. One is that the audience should be big enough to have some level of statistical significance. So if we do an experiment where 100 people are landing on this screen, 100 people are landing on this screen, two people convert here, one people convert here, or five people convert here, six people convert here, because the number of conversions are so low, it's going to be, even if say let's it's this is six and this is five conversions and 100 people have landed, it's going to be very hard to confidently say what if one person, like some random occurrence because of which one person did not do it, or right? So it needs to have statistical significance first and foremost. Second, and that is again from the perspective of what you are experimenting. You could have, let's say, a cohort where 1,000 people install, but only 100 people reach here, right? And 1,000 people install and 100 people reach here. When you're looking at statistical significance, you also need to look at from the context of the change that you're doing. At this starting point where the change is happening, where I'm experimenting, there needs to be enough people reaching so that data is large enough that I can confidently say whether it is working or not. So that is the first part of it. Second part of it is that if you are experimenting on a particular, so yeah, so let's say you want to sort of, uh, in this, so in Crafto, we have a create option where users go and sort of, if they want to create customized content where they come up with the code or designs, whatever, they can go and try. So once you have, if we go and sort of, again select a lot, a cohort of audience which is not paid, and then go and sort of make changes and run experiment around this flow, it's not going to work because paid non-paid users don't really have access, right? So relevant audience who would have access to the change that you have done, and they should be statistically significant enough, is what I would keep as a general rule in terms of selecting the audience. uh, does that make sense, Prasad?
Prakhar, Prasad's responded with yes.
All right, okay, awesome. Uh, okay. Steps for effective experimentation. So you need to define a very clear goal. So as I showed in the examples that, okay, we are only going to change this heading, and because of which people are going to understand the value of the product better, and because of which the conversion on the screen is going to increase more, right? Uh, so the goal there would be increasing the conversion, right? Hypothesis would be that if we communicate the value of the product better rather than in 3 points in a single headline, they are going to understand. They are going to understand what they are getting, and they are likely to convert more. So you can see it as an example also. If we implement X feature, then user engagement will increase due to Y reason. If we implement a newer headline, then users conversion will increase because they'll effectively understand what they are getting from the product. Okay. Now, the third point is identify metrics to measure success, right? So depending on what you are trying to do, it needs to be very, very clear what are the main metrics that you need to measure and what are the check metrics that you need to measure. Now, in the same example, let me, let's say we were talking about this example, right? Whatever, this example. In this, what you need to sort of make sure is one, that you are measuring the conversion, right? How many users from, let's say, who have successfully registered come and start a trial. And in both of these cases, that trial conversion is going to be the main metric that you sort of, keep in check, that you measure, because that's the net result, that's the net goal that you have to increase conversion. But along with that, what you also need to keep in mind is that the trial to paid conversion that happens. So in this particular product, we give a 3-day free trial, and post that you have, you basically, if you sign up using Apple payments, you end up sort of, the payments get auto deducted. Okay, so in this you also have to keep a check metric of registered users to paid users, because when you are doing a trial conversion experiment, it might be that you have done a change which gets more users to trial, but when they realize the value of the product is not as effective or is not interesting enough, they are going to cancel. So your net payment conversion is still going to be the same or might even drop. But you'll see the metrics of trial conversion on this experiment and say, hey, it worked, right? So you need to, the core metric that you are measuring in this context is trial conversion, and then you also need to keep a check metric that your payment conversion should also ideally increase rather than drop. Okay. uh, does that make sense? Oh, I'm taking that as a yes. Oh, there's a question. No. All right. So yeah, test variations, right? So as I showed you in examples, there would be multiple sort of, different different types of variations that you can sort of, test out of a particular flow within the product, right? Whether it might be onboarding, it might be conversion, it might be some particular feature flow, all of those things. There could be multiple ways that you can build it out, right? Coming from different angles. So it might be that, hey, I want to clearly show the value that users are getting, the content that they'll get to download. It might be that what they'll get, or what would be the end result of it, that they'll get likes and shares on social media. right? So there could be multiple angles that you can sort of design a flow with, and you need to make sure that you are clearly testing those variations with a control in check. What I mean by control is, this is the current flow that we have. We'll keep it for most users, and then for some users we'll try out this new variation, right? And then by comparing data in both of these cohorts, we'll come to a conclusion whether it is actually working or not, whether our hypothesis is working or not. Okay. And the next is, after testing, analyze the collected data to evaluate whether hypothesis. Yeah, as I said, right, after you've released the experiment, you wait and watch and get enough data, give it enough time to clearly see if the new variation that you have come up with for the user flow, is it actually adding any value or not. Okay. uh, I'm assuming no questions right now. Okay, perfect. All right. Next is, how do you basically even come up with these experiments? How do you even decide this is the thing that I want to experiment with? So, and how do you come up with a clearly defined experiment rather? Okay, so what we need to ensure in that is to clearly state what are we trying to do and what's going to happen if we do that. If we make a change, then this outcome will happen because of this reason, right? If you are clearly noting this down while starting an experiment, while you start thinking of an experiment, it's going to be super easy to actually run a clean experiment. It's going to be super easy because that is going to be your guiding light. It would make it very clear for you to make sure that you are not doing multiple changes in a single variation. It would ensure that you are not going after the wrong things in the experiment, right? So, like another example of this hypothesis is, if we simplify our onboarding tutorial, then user retention after 7 days will increase by 10% because users will understand the app's value faster. Now, this is a bit of a complex experiment where we are onboarding, which happens on day 0, and then we are saying that effect is going to happen on day 7, right? Uh, in such experiments, what we first of all, this is a valid hypothesis that if users are understanding your product better, then they're likely to use it more, and they're likely to stick around more, right? If they like the value of the product in the first place. Now, in such particular, like in such examples where you are, especially in case of retention, what you need to also sort of make sure is, there's some leading metrics that you always sort of keep a check on, that you always sort of look towards for signals whether it is going to work or not. So in this particular example, we're saying onboarding on day 0, day 7, there's going to be 10% increase. Now, a good leading metric would be some level of engagement, increase in engagement on day 1 itself, and then day 2, right? There's some level of initial increase in engagement which is going to happen, which in turn is going to sort of fuel the 10% or whatever x% increment that we are thinking. If there is no movement on day 1, day 2, there is very little chance that it's going to make any sort of significant impact at day 7, and that might help you sort of conclude the experiment faster and move on to the next thing. Okay. Again, this test one variable, as we discussed in the example, that this specific one specific change that you do, and you clear just focus on what difference is it making, right? Multiple changes are only going to lead to confusion. There's going to be, I mean, in happy cases, sure, you did multiple changes, there is a net improvement, but you will still not be sure whether it could have been better if I removed this just one thing, right? So always try to minimize the number of changes that you're doing in a variation, and just test those specific things. I think rest of the points are also something that I've iterated a couple of times. Are there any questions on hypothesis? Anything that you'd like to know?
Hi, Kaustubh. We do have a question. After
Okay.
experimentation, if we come to know that 50% of users are in favor of hypothesis 1 and the remaining
Mhm.
50% with the other hypothesis, then how do we allow customization for our product, keeping base product unchanged?
Okay. Very interesting. Okay. So I think in that particular case, what do you need to be able to sort of ensure is, if you are able to identify those users, those 50% cohort, right? Uh, if you are able to identify that, then you can personalize those experiences, right? If you are able to identify them upfront, if there are any common parameters, common attributes to those users, that you are able to clearly sort of state with conviction that for this particular cohort, it's going to definitely sort of create an impact. And in that also, you what you need to sort of ensure is how much of an impact is it actually creating for even that cohort. Let's say 50% of users are liking the hypothesis. How much are they liking? Is it that 3-4% positive improvement that is happening, or is it 20-30-40% improvement? Because when you look, because net you want to make the entire product work, right? Entire retention go up, entire conversion go up. So if it is that 2-3% improvement for whatever small cohort or half of the users, net it is 0.1, like 1.5% or 1% improvement for the entire product users, right? So you should always keep that check also, what is the net improvement that is happening. But if you are able to identify particular cohorts that sort of are performing really well with the new variation that you have put out, and if you are able to easily identify those sort of users early on in their product journey, then you can definitely customize that experience. But again, even this particular change of identification of users, and then sort of giving them different variation of product or different personalized flows for product, do that as an experiment as well. Don't just jump into that saying that okay, the other experiment showed that this cohort is working well with this variation. These are the 10 attributes for this cohort. So I'm going to put a check initially on registration that users that come in with this attribute would get this flow. Do that as an experiment as well. Because a lot of times, what we sort of, a lot of time data can be misleading, where because of certain factors that you might not be able to even see at that point when you're looking at data, certain context which might be swaying the data in a particular direction. So when you are doing these personalized experiences, always go deeper into sort of experimentation, one step even deeper. Essentially, when you identify a cohort, again do an experiment. Is what my suggestion would be.
Thanks for that, Kaustubh. We have another question. Is there a relation between the leading metric and North Star metric for the A/B test? If you're looking at engagement as a leading metric, but your North Star metric has to do with revenue, then there might be other factors influencing the customer's choices, right? Is this a situation that's best handled on a case by case basis?
Sure. So Uh, what I would suggest is, first and foremost, like, leading metric is a directional insight. It is not a confirmative insight. Okay. So if directionally leading metric is increasing, then it is very likely that users later would convert to, let's say, from a trial to payment. Okay. But if it is that the leading metric is itself dropping, let's say post trial users, the new flow that you created, post trial users are not sharing as much. I'm going to keep the examples to the particular case that I discussed so that everybody is on the same page, right? So in uh, the app that I showed you, let's say post trial users are not sharing enough content, then they're very less likely to actually sort of go and pay for your product because they are not using it, right? So leading metric is generally like a directional insight, and even if it is couple of steps before the metric that you're trying to solve, it generally is going to sort of give you clarity around it. What it would what you shouldn't take from a leading metric is that if there is an increase in engagement, it's definitely going to increase payments. But if there is a drop in engagement, it is very unlikely that it's going to increase payments and then revenue. Okay, that's how I would think about it. Uh, does that make sense?
Harsha has responded with makes sense. Thanks again.
All right, awesome, awesome.
I don't think we have any more questions right now. So,
All right, okay, cool. So far, I think Prasad has a question.
Prasad, can you let us? Okay, 1 second. Hi, Prasad. You should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. So probably my question was a follow-up question to my first question.
Okay.
Um, am I audible?
Yeah, yeah, you are. You are. Sorry.
Prasad, you were audible. Now you're on mute now. Okay. Prasad, you're still on mute if you want to. I don't know, maybe Prasad's facing some issues. We can wait for him. Until then, I think, Kaustubh, I think you can go ahead and
Oh,
I'll just check with him.
sure, sure. Cool. So I wanted to show you some examples of successful experiments and sort of, take you maybe a bit deeper into the how would you go about running experiments and what would potential results be.
Sorry, 1 second. Prasad, are you able to unmute yourself now? And
Yes. Am I audible?
yeah,
Yes.
you're audible now.
So the first question which I asked in Q&A section, right, about half of the users in favor of hypothesis one and remaining in hypothesis two.
Mm-hmm.
So as Kaustubh answered, personalization, we can go ahead with personalization experiment.
Mm-hmm.
But then the point is, the follow-up question which I have is, then when do we decide to make product-wise change instead of making it customizable for user sake?
No, so when you want to, sorry, when you want to make product wise change, right, there needs to be product wide net improvement. That's what I meant by, if it is, let's say, half of your users are in favor. So first of all, it's better to sort of quantify these, right? Because depending on how in favor they are, let's say for half of the users, your conversion increasing by 30%. That is case one. And second case is for half of your users, your conversion increasing by 3%. Right? So each of these cases need to be first of all handled separately. But coming back to your question, when do we make a product wide change? Product wide change would only should only be done, according to my opinion, when there is a net product wide improvement happening. So for net users, all users coming into the flow, not that particular cohort, but all users coming into the flow, how much net positive impact is happening with this new variation that you have tested? If the impact is big enough, then you need to sort of go ahead and sort of make that change across the product. And the big enough part of impact, it depends actually on your product journey. So when you are in early stage product building, right, when you don't have a super mature product, I think anything above 10% improvement is great, right? uh, but when you are a decently mature product, there are very few things left which are 10% above. So you start making changes which are maybe above 3 4%, right? So it completely depends on the context of the product building journey. But yeah, that's how I would think about when to make the change product wide.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for the.
All right. Okay. So yeah, I wanted to talk about couple of sort of case studies in terms of what were the experiments run, what were the results, and what were the hypotheses behind these experiments. So this is Kutumb. It is a community platform that I have worked on. We have about 10 million monthly active users. The primary job of the product is to connect Indian vernacular communities. So communities that we grew up around, right? It might be a Rotary Club, it might be a railway association, it might be whatever Khandelwal Samaj community, etc., etc. So all these type of communities don't necessarily have like a platform for themselves where there is focused attention towards a community. They could have WhatsApp groups, but it's very hard to have conversations when there are more than like 500 members in there. They could have Facebook groups, but it's very hard to get discovered in somebody's Facebook feed. They would have 200 friends, they would have 40 pages that they have liked, and content from all of that and your group, right? So getting discovery within somebody else's Facebook feed is very less. So that's why we went ahead and built that product. Now, within that product, we were trying to figure out ways to go and increase the retention. So we saw some level of basic flatlining that was happening. So as Nitin has had earlier pointed out, like there was basic PMF that was established, right? People were referring it to others, people were sticking around for a while on the products, etc., etc. So there was basic PMF happening, and we were trying to figure out how can we sort of go ahead and increase the retention. What we sort of observed and have in a way sort of grown up observing is whenever, specifically in India, when you meet people from your community, you end up having a very specific greeting. Like for example, if it is a community of Jain people, they tend to generally say Jai Janendra, right? If it is community of, like there might be some communities that use Jai Shri Krishna, there might be some communities that say Ram Ram, etc., etc. Depending on the community or context, you tend to have a very specific greeting, and they tend to sort of have they tend to use that greeting to, so whenever they meet each other. It might be while they are going for a walk in the evening, or while they sort of meet each other at a community meetup, etc., etc. So that was the insight, that people already have this offline behavior. Can we do something around it where we can bring this behavior online, and can we sort of make it even more delightful? The kind of almost affirmation that you get when you say Ram Ram to somebody and somebody else says it back, or any other greeting that you might have from your community, right? The kind of affirmation and the kind of good feeling that you get when the other person is sort of also saying that. Can you increase that? Can you bring that online, and can you increase that? Right? That's where we brought in, like that was the hypothesis or like the insight of great feature. right? And the thought was that if we are able to do that, where people can greet each other within their community on the app, they would keep coming back on for greeting each other, and this would lead to increase in retention, because this is the behavior that they already do, and now they'll be able to do it to a lot more people on the app. Does that make sense so far? Okay. Now, so what we now this is the final version of the product, where basically user clicks on this button, and then they keep on sort of, first of all, you have wished whatever greeting to 10,000 people or whatever the group count is. That is the first feedback that you get. You have said Ram Ram to these many people, or Jai Shri Krishna to these many people, or Vande Bharat to these many people, right? That is the first. Okay, I've said this to 10,000 people in one go. I've said this to everybody in my community. And then later, what happens is you start getting notifications that Vijay Devakar has wished you, Bachchan Mishra has missed you, whoever are the community members, these many, like each of these notifications you keep on getting, which gives users a feeling that it's not only that I am able to, wish all my community members, they are also wishing me back. They are also reciprocating. This brings an immense sense of, you know, belonging in the community, right? So this is what the feature was, and done from a retention perspective. Although, let me be very clear, the this is a very mature version of the feature. The first thing that we did was, without any of these bells and whistles, we just put in a button. The first variation was, say Jai Shri Krishna to 10,000 members of your community. That's it. Nothing else. We just added one button in the variation. We just added, and there was no sort of that button widget in the second variation. Just to see if the people are even interested. Would they even be interested in wishing others on a mobile app? Or would they just prefer to do it offline? Right? And then there were multiple sort of, probably around 20 experiments, small experiments that led to like a mature version of this feature. Okay. Another example, and this is a very classic example, right? So Pinterest earlier used to have, I think it's a bit blurry, but bear with me. So Pinterest earlier used to have a screen where there was a static background, right? Fixed images, no like real content here. And there was a clear blocker that until you sign up, you won't be able to access that content. Versus what they changed in their sign up process was, hey, you can come in, watch as much content as you want. And while you do enough scrolls, while you do enough browsing and realize, okay, this is a platform for really amazing curated content, that is when we are going to get you to sign up. Or when you try to save one of these pins, save, bookmark one of this content, that is when we are going to get you to sign up on the product, right? Which is such a smart way to actually, if it falls in your product journey, it is such a smart way to sort of, get people to sign up where they have seen enough value, and to sort of access more value. That is when they are highly interested, that is when you get them to sign up, that is get when you get them to register. Because frankly, most people don't care for registration. If it is possible, nobody would want to register anywhere. You have to go to Google, then you have to give like an approval, and then that company is going to send you endless mails. So you need to really get them to primed up for sort of, wanting to do it. And this particular experiment essentially resulted into about a 15 to 20% increase in sign up. Okay. Another, so this is again one of the, I think Duolingo is one of the biggest product case studies out there. If you haven't di- sort of read the content from their team, please do that. They are one of the best built products out there, so a lot to learn from them. And this is one of the examples from what they have done over the years. So earlier what they had done was that Duolingo, okay, first of all, if some of you don't know, Duolingo is a language learning product. You can go and learn English, Spanish, and a bunch of other languages on this process and on this product. And what they now learning effectively is something that nobody wants to do. We can, at least for like a long period of time. If you have to go and do 10 classes every single day throughout the next 10 days, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a huge drop off over time, right? So one off things are great, like one off bites are good, but if I have to do it daily, consistently, so that I am able to learn, which is what I want, most people drop off in the middle, right? So it's a hard problem to solve. Now, what they have done is essentially got you hooked into that, hey, if you keep on doing, we'll tell you that, hey, you have been continuously doing it for those many days. So I've been doing it for 10 days, I've been doing it for 15 days, and I've been doing 20 days, 30 days, 40 days. And even if you miss one day, you'll go back to zero. So again, you will have to work so hard, 40 more days again you have to put in to get to the next goal of 41. Right? So this is the basic concept of streaks that they introduced. Now, what they used to earlier do is, which is this example A, they would basically couple your lesson completion, which is like these really small bite-sized lessons that they have, along with whether you have, for the day streak. They broke it down to give them a clear sense of progress. So what this current screen does is that there is clear success that I can see. Okay, lesson complete. I got 10 experience points here. But I can also see something incomplete. So this is giving me positive feeling. This is giving me negative feeling. Right? Rather than that, what if we break it down where there is clear positive feeling on this case and then again clear positive feeling on the next screen, and there is some level of push that I'm getting, right? So that was the hypothesis of it, which essentially resulted in number of learners on day 7 plus streak over by 40%. Okay, so there are many such examples out there. it is a it is like extremely important for us to sort of go through these case studies as product builders and see what other people have done. But a big caveat, what you need to keep in mind while going through examples, while going through all of these case studies, is just because it worked for them doesn't mean it will work for you, right? Because the context is completely different. What, even if, let's say, you are building another language learning product, does not mean that if you go ahead and copy entirely what Duolingo has done, your product will work. Okay, there are going to be so many small nuances that have been worked on through the years in Duolingo. There's going to be a massive brand that with which the user is coming into the product, which they might not for your product, right? So you can take inspiration from all these case studies, but please do experiment all of these inspirations that you might draw, right? There is, do not straight away go and apply. And an even better way to sort of think about learning from these case studies is to understand what they have fundamentally done and see if that understanding resonates with you, and there are certain aspects of your product that you can apply that in. So for example, in this case, at what understanding we could potentially draw from that is key, give them clear sense of feelings on each screen, give them clear sense of success, give them clear sense of progress. Don't mix these two feelings together. Now wherever in your product there are such aspects where there is some level of success that they achieve, or there's some level of progress that you need to sort of showcase, make sure you don't couple them together, right? That is like, or whether it is some level of failure that you want to sort of say that, hey, you broke your streak. It shouldn't be with, hey, you completed your lesson but your 10-day streak is gone, or whatever the context of your product is, right? So learn from it, understand the fundamental user behavior that, or user insight that they have, right? Then test it in your product and see if it works. Okay. uh, Another such example is Headspace. This is a very onboarding related example where what they essentially, and there is a very good talk around it also, you can look it up on YouTube, where basically when they started off with like an onboarding process, Headspace is a mindfulness product, or is a product that helps you sleep better, be more calm, helps you with anxiety, etc., etc. Okay. So when they were building out the product, they listed down, okay, these would be the potential problems that we could solve, which would be managing everyday anxiety, sleep soundly, be more active, etc., etc., right? Reduce stress, etc., etc. And they thought, okay, let's build out a screen where user selects what are the problems that they're facing, and then we'll customize the rest of the flow for that, right? Give them relevant content, etc., etc., for the problem that they're facing. During like post they release the product, during the feedback calls, they realize that I am like, as a user, I'm not facing only one thing, right? And that's where they went ahead and made a change, which is a, if you think about it, single select to multi select, it's fundamentally not that big of a change, right, from a building perspective. But what it resulted in is that the sense of incompletion that comes in, where I want to select two options, three options, and I can only select one. The kind of decision making that I need to sort of do on this first screen, which is that, hey, I have anxiety, hey, I have sleep problems, hey, I have stress. Now I have to discuss, or rather decide in my head, which is the biggest problem for me, and then take a decision. You're basically putting user in more stress, right? So that is the fundamental insight, which eventually led to 10% increase in trial conversions. Okay. All right. uh, yeah, Prasad.
So I have a question on experimentation.
Yeah.
Uh, so do we experiment once the product is live and about to reach saturation level? As in, because once any feature reaches saturation level, we might have to decide whether we want to pursue with that feature or not, right?
um, can you explain the question a bit more? What do you mean by like
For
saturation level?
example, if that feature, if there's no engagement with that feature anymore, right?
Mhm.
Uh, let's say a new feature has come up in the market, right? If AI has taken over, and if
Okay.
there are better features for the same use case,
Hmm.
probably that particular feature won't be used by users anymore. That's what I'm referring to as saturation level. So if we get a sense of using our analytics, if we get that sense, right, that the particular feature is not being used by users, So do we carry out experiment to decide whether we want to pursue such features or not?
Okay, so generally, what, like, I don't think you'll be able to clearly get that insight that you talked about by looking at just data. Okay, whatever solution that you are building, right? Let's say, like the example that I talked about, it, the content product that I talked about, this. Let's say we see drop in engagement in that, right? That is a data that is like an insight that I can draw from data. But I won't be able to conclude that because AI has come in that this is going to, like, people have stopped using this and started using something else, right? This is
Mhm.
where you'll have to go and first of all talk to users and understand that, hey, I still, a, do they have the same behavior, or have they in general stopped sharing content on WhatsApp, right? Because that is what they used to do. They used to use this product for, right? Second is, if they're sharing content on WhatsApp, where are they now sharing it from? Is it that WhatsApp has Meta AI? They can directly create content from there. They're liking the content that is being created from there, and they can directly share from that. They don't need to go into a separate product, download, and then share. Right? That could be one possible insight. Right? Mm, these could be potential scenarios where you can try and understand how, if there is a drop in a metric for a particular feature, why is it happening? You can identify the drop using data, but you'll have to talk to users to understand why is it dropping, what has changed, is there behavior, is there a bug that you introduced in the feature? There could be a number of things, right?
Right. So let's say when we talk to users, they'll give us a reference of competitor apps having competitive
Mhm.
edge.
Mhm.
Uh, so in that case, do we consider enhancing our feature? What decision do we make?
You should, I mean, it depends on the context of your company, but you should definitely try and enhance my feature. Like, broadly, you should do that, right? If it is that you aren't able to deliver value as much as the other person or the other product in the market, you should definitely try and enhance the feature, right? And even to get to, like, like, I think a part of your question was, when do we start experimenting, right?
Yeah.
Is it that when the features metric drop? You
Right.
should experiment. Like, experimentation is how you build products. It's not a step in the process, it is the process. Okay, you ever, like, from the single germ of an idea that this is the product that I want to build, or this is the feature that I want to build, you just experiment and you keep on following that process, which is going to ensure that you are going in the right direction. Okay, it is not like at one point in the product building journey we'll experiment. It is like product building in today's day and age cannot be done effectively without experimentation.
Got it. Thank you.
Kaustubh, we have a couple of questions from LinkedIn from
Okay.
Paul Thomas. The first one is, how do you find factors or variables that affect growth?
How do you find factors or variables that
That
affect?
affect growth.
Okay. Uh, I'm assuming that this means that, if there, how, what should we do to grow our product? That is my interpretation of question of this question. Uh, Now, from that perspective, you should ideally, again, like, as we talked about in one of the first slides, that there are multiple parts of the product that you can work on to sort of grow your product, right? And within that, there are specific levers that you can action. So as we discussed that in user acquisition, you can either sort of, get people to refer for your product, get your users to create content that others would discover and come into your product. You can optimize ad journeys, you can Then in activation, you can sort of work on onboarding. In conversions, you can try free trials, freemium modes, etc. In retention, you can increase the fundamental value of the product, value that your product is providing, right? So these could be the different levers that you can work on to grow your product, right? Another aspect of that question might be that if there is a drop in growth, how do we identify what led to it, right? I'll I'll come to that in a bit, in one of the examples moving ahead, and how you can sort of ensure that what that you don't fall into like a stage where you don't know why it is happening. You should, even if there is a drop or drop in growth that is happening across any metric, you should know why it is happening. It happening is not as bad as you not knowing why it happened, right? So I'll come to that in an example moving ahead. Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kaustubh. Paul's also asked another question, which is how do we identify what are things we should be experimenting with?
Okay. So I think that goes back to like the earlier this slide of when we talked about how do you build actionable hypothesis, how do you even in fact hypothesis, like build an hypothesis. uh, I think the there are two fundamental ways to do it. One is that you go and talk to users, and you talk to users on a regular basis, just to understand whether the problem that you're trying to solve is something that they care about, whether the solution that you're providing to them is good enough. Can there be any improvements? Are there any issues that they're facing in accessing that solution, etc., etc. There could be multiple sort of angles that you could look at that conversation that you're having with users. So I think that is one of the primary ways to do it. The second way to do it is to look at data and look at the benchmarks around your type of product in the industry. So for example, if you are building like a photo beautification app, where you basically, as the first example that I took, that you go and sort of upload your photos and you beautify them through some editing and you download it. If that is the product that you're building, you should ideally look at benchmarks of different metrics in such products, in photo and video products. Generally, how many people for, let's say, a 75th percentile app within that category, how many people sort of go and sort of complete the registration, how many people go and start a trial, how many people go and convert from trial to payment. So you should ideally look at benchmarks and then see gaps within your metrics. Let's say the benchmark for trial conversion is, let's say, around 15% from install to trial for most photo to video apps, and you are at somewhere around 10. So that is the part of the journey that you need to focus on, right? And within that, again, it could be broken down into install to registration and then registration to trial, etc., right? So you can essentially, what I'm trying to say is, you can look at the benchmarks, see what part of the journey, if at all, you are sort of lagging behind and can be improved, and then go deeper into what could be the potential issues. And again, then once you have identified the part of the journey, you can again go and do user calls and see if there is sort of hey, when you, for new users, when are you able to understand the value of the product? Are you able to easily take trial? Or is there anything that you are confused about, that you are not understanding about what the product is offering? Right? All these sort of questions can sort of lead you into the directions of potential things to solve, and those would essentially turn into hypotheses and the experiments that you can run. Okay.
We have another question, that is, can you help understand the term variable? Are you referring to a metric here?
Oh, okay, okay. No, so basically, what I mean by variable is one change. not a metric, but one change in the experiment. So as I let me show the example again. Uh, okay, in these two screens, what has majorly changed is how you're communicating the value of the product via text. So there is one headline here versus there are 3 points talking about the value of the product. Right, so this is one variable change. The rest of everything below his here is same. This is more or less the same. Size has changed a bit, but this is the one variable change that I'm talking about. And other way could have been that from this starting point you reach here. So there's this part is new, how you're communicating the value is new, how you're presenting the plans is new, the pricing itself is different. Too many changes, right? So what I mean by one variable change is that you do just one small change in the experiment, and then you sort of take it forward from there. If it is like a positive result that you are seeing, then you make that available to all users. That becomes your new sort of normal, right? And then on top of it, you can go and make another change. Okay. Nitin, is this clear? Okay, awesome. All right. Cool. How do you go about maximizing your experiment's success? Right. Now you need to start like really small. So like we talked about like just one variable change, right? And also you need to be very clear on the amount of users that you are doing the change on. Ideally it should be between 5 to 10% of the users that you are sort of doing the change, but it also is driven from the sorry, the audience that you have. So if you have like over 10,000 or rather over 100,000 daily active users, then 10% of them are good enough to sort of run an experiment with. But if in total you have 1,000 users on your product, then you'll probably have to sort of do the change on 50%. But make sure it's always lesser than 50%, right? Ideally small enough that most users are not affected by it. Second, but it should be big enough that there is statistical significance to it. If you do it just for 10 users or 100 users, whatever data might come, it might not be reliable enough, because very small changes in individual users context could sway the data either ways. Okay. Next is segment users for targeted experiments. So basically it now when you're running experiments, depending on the context of the product, you can either sort of run experiments mm, which are sort of broad rolled out to all type of users, but like a small percentage of all type of users, and you can measure the data accordingly. But it might change a lot depending on the context of your product, and let me give you an example of that. So let's say you're building a dating app. Now, generally what happens is there is higher recept. You'll typically go and sort of, run ads on, hey, do you want to go on dates with different people? Download this app, right? People would come and install. You would prefer to run these ads across like a geography, not just like tier one cities, etc., because the install cost is going to be lower when you have like a much broader set, right? But probably like it will be 10, 12 cities where more than 50% of your audience would be coming from. And in the rest of the cities, there wouldn't be enough liquidity of users, because dating is a like a matching game, right? There needs to be enough profiles there for people to feel that they have enough options that they can sort of go and match with and go on dates with. right? So within a geography, there needs to be enough liquidity for, like, even if you run any experiment, but you are sort of, looking at geographies which don't have enough liquidity, you won't be able to measure the experiment correctly, right? But if you are looking, so in such cases, you would want to look at, let's say, top 10 cities, and within that cohort, within that demography, how many sort of, how much improvement am I getting, whether it is like a subscription for a more value added product, like let's say a Tinder Plus, right? Or whether it is that time taken to get a match, or number of likes that a person is getting, or number of profiles that a person is seeing, depending on the metric that you're trying to improve. So you should segment users, uh, but it completely depends on what you are building, and you need to be very cognizant of the fact that, given context of my product, this is what is going to lead to net improvement for business. This is the experiment that gives me clear insight into that what we are doing is a net addition for business. Why this much, right? That is the perspective that you need to keep while looking at who to sort of, run experiment with. Next is document learnings through cross team sharing. Now, if you, let's say you start running experiments, you end up luckily building an organization that runs a lot of experiments, right? Runs good hygienic experiments where there's clear definition, etc., etc., right? You're doing all the right things. Now, what would happen, and or rather what could compound these learnings, or what could potentially give you a massive upside in the long run, is very clear documentation, very clear insight sharing. And this is something that I, as a PM, have also failed at, right? I would run like really nice experiments. I would measure them well. I would do user calls after the experiments are done to clearly understand whether what I'm understanding from the data is what users are also seeing or not. All of that, all the sort of right things, right? But after working on multiple experiments for 6 months, there would be some questions for a newer experiment that we would have answered through earlier experiments, right? But since there was no documentation, it was very hard to, and it's very hard to remember also post 6 months the nitty gritties of everything, right? So, like a clear documentation of, this is why we ran this experiment, this is what how we ran this experiment, this is what happened, this was the learning, this is what the user said, etc., etc. Having clear documentation really helps with that. And now imagine if you have 10 PMs, 4 PMs, whatever the size of organization, if you can learn from each other's learning, your hit rate in terms of, let's say you are running 10 experiments, how many of them are net positive successful experiments, is going to increase immensely, just because you're learning so fast. Because that is what experimentation is, right? Trying, it works great, this is why it works, so you calibrate yourself, okay, this is what users are looking for, right? This is why it didn't work. Okay, then you again calibrate your product sense, that this is what users are not interested in, this is not how we can solve users problem because of these reasons, right? This is constant calibration of your product sense. And if you are able to calibrate yourself from the learnings of whatever n number of PMs that you might have in your organization, and they can do that also. Think of the quality of the experiments that you'll run in time. Your team is going to run in time. So this is a very feels like a very tedious task. It feels like very corporate school, like why do I need to document, and like I know what I did, etc., etc. But long term compounding effects are immense, right? And this is again something that I also need to get better and better at, but surely long term effects cannot be neglected of this. Okay, yeah, the last one is again more focused towards when you're running an experiment, be sure to connect with the net business impact, right? If you are trying to increase retention, conversion, whatever, right? If it is not making like a significant difference in the business impact, is not going to be valued in your organization, right? It's just not. It won't be a net positive. It's not going to be valued in your organization. Running experiments for the sake of running experiments is not what we need to do. That every change that we are going to do from today on is only going to be an experiment. No, that's not what we should sort of take away from this. You need to run experiments which potentially could add net positive to your business, to your product, right? Only then it is like a sensible experiment to run. Always connect whatever you are thinking as an experiment to the net business goal. All right. Okay. Now I want to share like an interesting sort of experiment that we ran probably a year, 2 years ago, and the mistakes that I have made, right? So as I was talking about Kutumb, it's a community app, right? Now within Kutumb, we have a leaderboard where basically we list down points that you have gotten within the community, and you get points by contributing to the community. So you'll get, let's say, 100 points for referring users to the community. You'll get 5 points for sharing post with other members, like on outside the app, right? You'll get 5 points for each like that you get. If you wish other people in the community, then you'll get points. If you do other things, you'll get points, right? So there would be certain actions, positive actions that you can do within the community, which is going to sort of get you points. And if you get highest points, you'll get on top of the leaderboard. If you get on top of the leaderboard, you'll get a certificate from the community for your contribution. Okay, so this is the feature that we have already built, experimented a bunch of things with. What should be the trigger points, or what should be the positive contributions, etc., etc. And right now, while trying to increase user acquisition, our thought was that what if we so this is the latest sort of point system, but our thought was that we want to increase user acquisition. If we and we know that there is a subset of users that is really after the leaderboard, that really wants to get on top and be recognized within the community, right? If we can leverage that cohort to refer more people, we'll be able to sort of add a lot more users to the product. If we get them, if we add more positive sort of incentive to that particular action of referring users, then we should be able to sort of do like make really positive sort of add more users to the product essentially via reference, right? And we also wanted to ensure that there is some level of sanity in terms of the leaderboard, that users who are referring versus users who are doing other thing. If you after a point you might not have enough people to refer, so after a point the long term users, they should also have a chance to get on top of the leaderboard. So it is not that you will give 1,000 points for a referral, but for getting likes on your post, creating post, sharing post, you will only get one point, which would mean that you have asked users to essentially not do any of those actions, right? So we wanted to keep some level of sanity, right? So what we did was we increased referrals to, let's say, from 50 to 100, and for post likes, basically we went from 5 to 2, and for post share we kept the 5 as same, or rather it was actually post share you would get 2 points, best post you'll get 2 likes, and then referrals you'll get 100 points, right? Which is essentially that you would still have option to uh, get sort of likes, and we want the top person at least to be the one who has done referrals, so that when somebody else looks at their profile and tries to find out why they are at the top, there should be clear reasons essentially shown there that they referred 10 people, that's why they are on top. And if we are able to give that signal to other users, they'll also start sort of showing the same behavior, right? This was the essentially the thesis. Now we ran the experiment, right? We started monitoring leaderboards of these. We had like a bunch of communities on the platform, right? We started monitoring leaderboards. We started seeing, okay, people who are on the top of the leaderboards are now people who are doing the most number of referrals. Okay, first check. We started seeing that the number of new users coming into these groups, especially via referrals, started increasing. Okay, second check, right? Uh, then we started seeing, okay, third, fourth user that was there, right, or fourth, fifth users, they were people who had been around for a while, who already had referred people, so did not have that many people to refer. So they were creating more posts and they were sort of, getting likes or like points through these factors. We did user calls. The older users were obviously sort of, complaining about, hey, why are you giving so many points for referral, right? And this was expected, right? This is not like a completely new discovery for us. Then new users were elated and wanted to refer more, that, hey, I also sent it in my school group. I also asked them to join via my link, etc. Because we were hearing these stories on the call. So aim of the experiment was to increase user growth. We saw an increase in user acquisition, like user signups in these communities that we were running the experiment with, right? Other metrics were somewhat similar. There was no drop in like daily active users. There wasn't drop in post share as much. There wasn't like drop in post creation, right? Monitored it for 2 3 weeks, and decided to, okay, looks good, let's sort of go ahead and release it to all users. Now after probably like 6 months, we were sort of so we would take check daily data, right? How many daily active users are there, how many sort of post creations are happening, what are the percentage of users creating post, etc, etc. All of these daily metrics we would look at. Over time, when we were sort of zooming out, we saw like a slow drop happening in the daily active user, really slow, like a very little slow. It's not like a particular sort of a big sort of an angle that the drop is happening, where you would be able to very clearly state that, okay, this on 28th it was really good, 29 really bad, something happened in between. So it wasn't like that. It was a very slow, right? But obviously in problem is, so we started backtracking. Okay, this is the change we did, this is the change we did before that, rolling back changes, all of those things are happening. Eventually we realized that a part of our daily active users was coming because users would share their post on WhatsApp with other people in the community, would ask them, hey, come on come on the community app on Kutumb and like my post. So they would get points for both of these things. Like they would get the like point and they would also get points because people are opening up for their links. And this behavior of users who wanted to be on top of the leaderboard, sharing their post that they have created with other people on WhatsApp, etc., and pushing them essentially to come on the app. And then, right, all of this cycle started to slow down, because even after time, and not in 3 weeks but in couple of months, is when this sort of there was a slowly decline in this behavior, right? So this, sometimes you have to, when you're making change and see positive results, right, you might want to wait a bit and run the experiment long enough that there is like sort of actual change that is happening. And especially in when you're running sort of, experiments in some level of, like, this is like proper app economics, right? There is way to earn this currency, which is points, right? Person who earns most currency today would get a certificate, right? Now, what actions do I need to do in this economy to get most currency today is is what the user's sort of angle is, right? So when you're running experiments which are like a little bit more complex, or you're touching parts of the product which are a little bit more complex, taking a bit more time to sort of wait and watch, even if there is positive sort of signals coming in, right? Positive data that you can see, positive feedback that you're getting from users, might be a good idea, right? So there is no fix sort of a timeline that I can state, okay, wait and watch for 1 week or 1 month or 3 months or 6 months, right? You have to take that judgment call in time, right? And as you build your product more and more, you get that understanding. Okay, this is what I think is good enough. Like for Kutumb, now we know that if there is a complex experiment, especially where we are trying to change inherent behavior, we should wait 1.5 months, 2 months for that. Right. If it is like a small conversion experiment, we'll probably conclude it in 7 days because we have enough users to conclude it in 7 days, right? So depends on the context of your product, and always watch out for this and keep a note of this, right? If you are able to, as I was talking in the earlier example, if you are very clearly documenting, at least later if you identify the issue, you'll be able to backtrack, okay, this particular change that we did, this could be the potential reason for it, right? So always sort of, wait enough time and document what you're doing, so even if there is a miss, you have clear sort of a ledger for you to go back to and identify what happened. All right. Uh, so there's one more question, I think, from Nitin.
Yeah, the question is, do we prefer tool to predict business impact for experimentation results, or is there any way to get more accurate prediction?
Uh, Sorry, I didn't understand.
Do we prefer tools to predict business impact for experimentation results, or
Mhm.
is there any way to give accurate predictions?
I mean, if it was accurate predictions were possible, then we wouldn't need to experiment, first of all, right? Uh, so I don't know. I At least I don't know any tools, any techniques to give accurate predictions. But in time, you are able to build like a hunch for this is the potential impact for the user, right? And as you do more and more experiments, you are able to come closer to the net impact that it could potentially have. But it is like a individual's calibration of their product sense. I don't know any specific tools that could potentially help with that.
I think, Prasad, you want to expand on your question?
So how about so I've heard about tools like Mixpanel and other tools which help you with analytics.
Mhm.
Do we use them while we experiment so that we could input our experimentation results and somehow the backend engine will help us give a prediction score? I'm just trying to explore, if there are any other options
Okay.
available. So when
So
I'm referring to accuracy, I'm not referring to 100% accuracy, but some some tool which can help us to predict better. Like we have data science and AI models, right, which help us to predict better.
okay. So Mixpanel, first of all, in particular, is a analytics tool which helps you measure and visualize data better. Okay, so when you are running experiment, you'll monitor the data of an experiment on a Mixpanel or Amplitude or any of these analytics tools. Okay, and within these tools, there are like sub tools or basically features where you can run A/B experiments. where you can define a cohort and sort of, run A/B experiments through these tools as well, right? But clear or even directional prediction uh, of your product experiment via a tool, at least I haven't come across so far. So we use Amplitude. I've also used Mixpanel before. I haven't seen any of these tools being able to very clearly sort of give any sense of prediction, simply because a prediction requires a lot of data and a lot of context of your product and your user, which is
Okay.
going to be very hard for you to be able to communicate to a tool, right? Whether it is like an GPT type AI or like Mixpanel, etc. Think of it like this, like as you might so Mixpanel would have your data, but it won't have why users are behaving how the data is saying. It will tell you users are behaving like this. It won't tell you why users are behaving like this. That's why you do user calls, right? So all of these tools won't have enough data to give you like a very clear prediction. A better way to judge whether you should do an experiment or not is to just take that hypothesis to the users, call them up, ask them that, hey, this is what we are thinking. Do you face this problem? Do you think this is a good way to solve it? Right? This might be like a better way to, if you want to sort of, preempt that, you want to increase your hit rate, that, hey, I want to, at least out of the 10 experiments, I want to do 3, 4 good experiments or successful experiments,
All
right?
right.
That might be a better way to do it.
So can I just ask one follow-up question? Probably if time. Arlene, can I ask a follow-up question? Do we have time?
Yeah, yes, of course.
Uh, so in this case, as we know that, you know, experimentation plays vital role for making it a success, right? Then probably choosing a sample size, which will eventually help us to take the decision based on experimentation results would be a good idea. So now let's say we haven't yet realized market potential or we haven't done market sizing yet, right? But we choose to experiment with people whom we have interviewed during our primary research,
Hmm.
right? Have you ever experienced a scenario, in your career so far where the uh, the first experimentation or the experimentation with primary research candidates was misleading or eventually turned out to be misleading?
I mean, yes, that does happen, but again, I think the primary reason for that happening, for that misleading effect coming in, or you misreading the results, might be because the sample size is not big enough, right? Or how you're showing the experience to the users. If you are sort of, doing like a prototype sort of a testing with, like earlier said, something like that, how you are communicating that, how you're running that sort of study is going to completely sort of define whether you're going to come up with like effective results to that or not. So it's
Okay.
either going to be sample size or how you are sort of, running that study. These would be the two major reasons, I think, for getting like a misread during like early stage experimentation.
And then how do we define big enough sample size when we are just exploring market size?
Though even if exploring market size, right? The basic way, let's say you are, I'm I'm thinking that this is more towards that, hey, I have this app idea. Should I go and build it or
Yeah.
not? This
Yes.
is the stage.
Yes.
So I think two good ways to do it is, one, at least talk to 20, 30 people, right? Whatever sort of problem that you're trying to solve, and see if it is relevant to them or not. That is one, right? Second is, you can, so from there you might be able to build some conviction to grow to a, like, to go to a larger audience. Second is, you can run Google Forms, like forms on Facebook ads, which would be, and if you're building a product in India, each lead would cost you 1, 2, 3 rupees, like really cheap sort of per user insight. You can run these forms using Facebook ads and drive insight through that. So even if, let's say, you get 100 people to fill your form, it would be 100, 200, 300 rupees, right? And that might give you a sense of direction in terms of what you need to do next. So earlier, 0 to 1 building, before you even have a product, you just have an idea. These might be like good ways to validate it, if it even is sort of, hitting the user or not.
Got it. Thanks for the explanation. I'm good.
All right. Okay. Cool. So some of the common mistakes that we should avoid, right? Uh, Obviously, if there is like inherent bias in experimentation design, uh, so like for example, like the case that you were talking about, right? A very early stage sort of question user feedback you're doing, and if you're leading the questions, hey, when you face XYZ problem, what do you do? You have already sort of put the user into the mindset that they are facing a problem. You haven't really identified whether it is a big enough problem for them or not. Right? So you already led them in a direction ki, okay, yeah, I'm facing a problem, not now what, how I should react, what should be my response. Right? So this is one way of bias in experiment design or taking feedback. In terms of like the app design or the product design, what it could mean is you are sort of, um, what it could mean is you are sort of over promising to get user to cross your funnel, right? So when we were talking about like the registration to trial conversion experiment on the payment screen, and then sort of you might over promise that, hey, you are going to, this is going to get you 10,000 likes, and this, there are over 1 million people, all of these big influencers are using this product, etc. You do all those promises on the your trial screen, obviously more people are going to convert to trial, right? Which is going to show you like a positive sort of uh, result of that experiment. But in time, when you look at the larger sort of metric, which is install to payment or registration to payment, you'll realize that the payments haven't moved or in fact dropped because you over promised and did not deliver. You had a unnecessary bias in the experiment where you sort of went ahead and sort of communicated something which wasn't true. You just wanted to get user to click on that button, right? So those things might sort of be examples of bias in experiment design. Misinterpreting results. So the case that I talked about, right? We saw positive sort of improvement in user acquisition, new users started signing up, but net the number of monthly active users started dropping because we misinterpreted the results there. And last is scaling experiments across larger audience, which is again like wait enough time to get like really convinced that the data that you're seeing is sort of large enough, and you have looked at enough angles to be really confident about it. Only then go and sort of scale your experiment to larger audience. So yeah, this has been my broad thoughts on how we can sort of run experimentation within as like a product manager and grow your product. I also have curated some tools and templates that you can sort of use in your journey. Uh, there's some collection of A/B tests. There's some growth case studies. There are templates around building hypothesis. How do you prioritize your experiments? How do you sort of track your experiments over time? So I'll just share this in chat. You can go ahead, sort of please create copies for yourself.
And we'll also make sure to send it across in an email post the session to all the attendees as well.
Awesome, awesome. Okay. Cool. I think yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you for sticking around. Right.
Thank you for the wonderful session, Kaustubh. Kaustubh, I want to thank you for your valuable time and your wonderful expertise and all your insights and the knowledge you provided today. We really appreciate it. I'm sure this has been a very fruitful session for all the attendees today. Please accept this certificate of appreciation from the institute side for this wonderful masterclass today.
Thank you.
The QR code on the certificate will actually take you to a dedicated Hall of Fame page we've created for you, especially on our IPL website. So I'll make sure to send this across to you via email also.
Awesome.
Okay, great. I don't see any questions on LinkedIn or on Zoom, but we do have a comment from Senthil Kumar on LinkedIn who has said, really an eye opener session. So thank you very much. I'm sure everyone. We have Nitin also. Okay, we have a question from Nitin. That is the topic on bias that you mentioned. Is that related to fake door tests? Say we mention an offer and then not roll out.
Yeah, that is one example of it, Nitin, basically. But there could be other sort of ways where you are either sort of, when you're choosing the audience for the experiment, you are sort of, focused more on like a cohort of audience uh, that is going to be interested in that feature, but net it's not going to sort of add like enough value to the product. So like when I was example talking about the creation flow within our product, right, 5% of users actually go and create something. So I can go ahead, run an experiment there and get 10% improvement in creation, but it would be for the product itself, it would be uh, you know 10% of 5%, right, of users who create, right. So those could be like you can have bias while defining the audience for the experiment. You could have bias while sort of communicating the value in terms of UI or UX, right. There could be different sort of levels in which you can create a bias. General sort of thumb rule is to see when you're defining an experiment, there's going to be enough takers for that experiment that there is a net impact in the product, and you are making small enough change where you can clearly state if sort of a net metric movement is happening, it is for because of this particular change, the one variable thing that we talked about. I think this could be like a good hygiene to keep to avoid bias.
Okay, great. Thanks for that answer, Costa. Nitin has followed it up with statistical significance is what is required, right, in terms of the population.
Yes. So you can definitely, yes, statistical significance is definitely required. And within that, you also, like, if you don't have enough users, you can maybe wait for a longer period of time to accumulate that data. If your product is like in a comparatively early stage, maybe wait a while for enough users to come in and experience that experiment and sort of, then take a decision. That could be another approach if you don't have enough users.
Okay, okay. Thank you. I think due to time constraints, we can wind up the session now. I think we've answered everyone's questions as well. So thank you once again, Kaustubh, for joining in and delivering this wonderful session. Um,
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you for having me. It was really
of
nice
course,
speaking to you.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you to all our attendees also for joining in on this Saturday morning. I'm sure this has been a fruitful time for you all as well.